Between 10,500 and 8,500 BCE, humans began to switch from hunting and gathering to farming, a change which led to larger populations, permanent settlements, material for future farming, stimulator video games, and many other developments we now consider typical across the globe. I was joking about the video games. This development is known as the First Agricultural Revolution or the Neolithic Revolution. For many generations, it was considered a great leap forward as it led to the creation of cities and accompanied the emergence of organized religions and political structures, as well as a wide range of occupations and economic trade. But as we learn more and more about how humans lived before the agricultural revolution, it seems like we lost out on more than we gained. Welcome to Remedial Herstory, where we ask what happened to the women and put them in. In this series, we tell women's history from era to era from the perspectives of differing and diverse women. Women are half of history. Welcome to Her Story. The agricultural revolution took place at different times in different parts of the world, but the first one began in what we call the Fertile Crescent, the land stretching from the Tigris and Euphrates river valleys in Mesopotamia to the Nile River Valley in Egypt. It is here that archaeologists have found the earliest evidence of the beginning of agriculture, so that is where we will take a closer look at the evidence. To keep things simple, we will focus on the bones and artifacts from two cultures in the Fertile Crescent: the Neolithic farming settlement at Abu Hurriya and the settled hunter-gatherers of the Natufian culture that existed prior to the Neolithic Revolution. Agricultural evidence does not always offer us a complete picture of what happened, so we will also consider evidence anthropologists have gathered from foraging societies that exist today. Prehistoric women might have been at the heart of the transition to farming from hunting and gathering. Hunting would have been the task assigned to the most able-bodied people of the community, which was usually men in their prime, though some modern foraging societies invited women who had not yet had children to take part in the hunt. So that means women, children, and the elderly would work together to gather grains and fruit and legumes from the wild. It is possible that women were the ones who observed the connection between the fallen seeds and the richer harvest when they returned to a certain spot later. The earliest versions of farming predated the Bronze Age. It did not involve a plow. Rather, the farmer would use a stick, poke a hole to which the seed was dropped. After the harvest, women would do much, if not all, the food preparation. A task called for the grinding of grain on a stone pallet. There's evidence that women in the earliest farming communities were physically very strong. A comparison to prehistoric women's arm bone fragments to the Cambridge women's rowing team showed that ancient women had bone strength that measured 9% stronger than modern athletic women. If you ever run into a prehistoric woman, do not mess with her. That strength came with a cost. When Thea Malessen of the British Museum looked at the women of Abu Hurriya site occupied 6,000 years in what is now Syria, she found evidence that these women spent hours kneeling over their grinding stones, resulting in deformed toes, curved thigh bones, and arthritic knees and backs. Pre-agricultural skeletons reveal none of those issues. Furthermore, the teeth of earlier humans were in much better shape. The teeth of Neolithic farming people first showed more wear and tear as bits of stone ended up in the grain, and later showed more cavities and gum disease as soft porridge they ate left a buildup of sugar and carbs on the tooth. Farming peoples worked harder and were less healthy overall. Anyway, trust me, you do not want Bronze Age fillings. In addition to the impact on bones of farming people, they had far less nutritious diet because they focused on a few crops that grew easily compared to other foodstuffs. Imagine eating yams at every meal. That meant they had fewer foods to choose from, and a limited diet is automatically not as rich as a varied diet, like those of the hunter-gatherers. The farming people would have been more likely to develop conditions and digestive difficulties, among other things. Humans lost their connection to nature along the way as well. Modern-day foragers who live much like our hunter-gatherer ancestors did still experience this deep sense of connection with the natural world. When a forager arrives at a new place, she will spend time observing and absorbing the sights and smells around her. Many wild animals do the same thing. Try taking in the sights and smells at your local Walmart, and then we'll see if you feel inspired by your surroundings. Though we used to assume that life before farming was brutal, archaeologists have unearthed wonders that dramatically alter what we thought we knew about life before the Neolithic Revolution. One site named Ohala II had been inhabited continuously for many generations, almost 23,000 years ago. These humans were hunter-gatherers, but they were not migratory. They often lived in small villages near forests and waterways and let the food come to them. That means that they survived on a rich array of resources without having to travel far to find them. Sort of like Instacart, but free. Archaeologists have found the remains of food such as almonds, pistachios, olives, grapes, and many other edible plants. Among these is a fruit known as the rubus, similar to a blackberry. That's something that had to be eaten fresh. Animals' remains included a wide variety of fish, turtles, waterfowl, and several breeds of mammal ranging from rabbit to gazelles. They did find grinding stones that still held fragments of barley, wheat, and oats. There were even sickle blades, showing us the residents of this tiny village had figured out how to harvest, even though the evidence suggests they only engaged in small-scale planting. Archaeologists have found very little wear and tear on the sickle blades, supporting the idea that they were only used occasionally. Residents in the settlement would have been well-fed, but probably not overworked. Men's and women's skeletons were very similar in terms of wear and tear and overall health. It was only after humans took up farming that women's bodies bore the mark of physical labor while bent over a grindstone. Farming people were also shorter than earlier humans due to the limited nutrition available. Historian Jared Diamond argued,
"Farming may have encouraged inequality between the sexes as well. Free from the need to transport their babies during a nomadic existence and under pressure to produce more hands to till the fields, farming women tend to have more frequent pregnancies than their hunter-gatherer counterparts, with consequent drains on their health. Among the Chilean mummies, for example, more women than men had bone lesions from infectious diseases."
The Agricultural Revolution represents a move away from tiny settlements like we find at Ohala II, and towards massive populations laboring to farm larger and larger territories. Humans sought to increase production of wheat, originally just a wild grass, but one which grew easily, if properly protected. Doing so meant not just plowing the soil, sowing the seeds, it meant draining the land if the weather was too wet and building irrigation ditches if it was too dry. Wheat had to be protected from pests like rabbits, sorry bugs, with the introduction of fences. Furthermore, settling so many people in one place led to a buildup of human and animal waste, spreading disease such as parasites, infections, and viruses. Ew. Pests too small to block out with fences such as rats and mice were attracted to stored food. The growth of rodent populations attracted predators such as wild cats and dogs, leading to the domestication of those animals. So it wasn't all bad. Though scholars have claimed since the Renaissance that prehistoric humans were violent brutes, their lives were nothing compared to the violence that accompanied competition for scarce resources. When a hunter-gatherer group felt the pressure of a stronger bunch of foragers, they could simply move elsewhere. That was no longer an option. The farmed land had to be protected from scavengers and neighbors of the community, or they would starve. Even the simplest farmer had to be prepared to defend the land. Thus, the future of the successful app game Clash of Clans was guaranteed. Just kidding. This competition and need to protect the harvest contributed to a growing hierarchy in society. Just as farming would have been advanced by a clever individual who could direct projects and rise in status in the group, the need for protection introduced dedicated warriors to guard the boundaries. The next logical step, of course, is that dedicated warriors and community leaders were increasingly excused from the actual labor and were fed by the work of other people. Hierarchies emerged, leaders became entrenched, and over thousands of years, division of labor extended to specialized occupations that served those in power, often at the expense of those who worked the hardest. Even burial practice reflected the changes in social order. In pre-farming burial sites, the graves of men and women were all roughly the same. People were buried with a few items that seemed to link each person to a particular clan or place. The dead were often buried near to the homes of the descendants, linking the living to their ancestors. After the Agricultural Revolution, graves began to show enormous differences in wealth and status. Poor laborers were buried with almost nothing, while warrior graves contained weapons and the graves of the wealthy and powerful contained treasures and food offerings. It's pretty clear that as agriculture created wealth for some, it also created poverty for others. All territories were now under someone's control. Apart from climate change, another possible explanation for the move towards agriculture has to do with religion. In Turkey, there is an ancient religious complex at Göbekli Tepe dating back to 9500 BCE. There were no dwellings or fortifications here, and the evidence points to the fact that this religious site predated widespread farming. There are traces of feasts in the form of ancient bread and beer, and all made from grains collected in the wild. Ancient Oktoberfest, perhaps. There are large curved sculptures of humans and wild animals. There are small numbers of huge stone monoliths as well. Some mysterious spiritual calling led hunter-gatherers to gather at Göbekli Tepe to build, to worship, and then return to their nomadic or semi-settled lives. Ideas about the cosmos and worship of deities may have indicated a growing sense that humans were not like other animals. Some scholars believed that our growing disconnection from nature is what led to farming, rather than farming leading us away from nature. Why did humans not reverse course when we realized life had become so much harder? The simplest explanation is that when you see how everything has changed, it's usually too late to reverse course. Change is gradual, and even if we are aware that society is changing for the worst, it's very difficult to figure out how to improve your situation. Consider this: a serious downside to hunter-gatherer life is the absolute need to limit the size of the population, even if that meant committing infanticide, killing babies, to keep those numbers low. After the Agricultural Revolution, when surplus food was possible, families were able to feed more people, and therefore they were able to have bigger families. It's a little hard after a couple generations of population growth to simply go back to being a hunter-gatherer. In fact, there's still some debate on the impact of humans having bigger families. Historian Yuval Noah Harari reminds us that humans no longer practiced infanticide after the advent of settled farming, but the loss of health usually increased infant mortality at the same time. Many farming mothers fed their babies porridge in order to stop nursing and return to heavy labor. The lack of mother's milk contributed to illness and weakness among young children. Did the benefits of settled life outweigh the loss of free time and more equal society? Could ancient humans have made any other choice? Is it possible that the life of a forager is the best in terms of balance, connection to nature, a varied diet, and mutual respect for all the members of the community? But for all its costs, agriculture has led over time to amazing advances in the arts, science, language, and literature. Once we jumped on the agricultural path, everything we enjoy in modern life became possible. Was it worth it, or was agricultural revolution a huge mistake? Thanks for watching. If you want to dive deeper into these questions and form your own conclusions, go to our website, remedialherstory.com, where you can find free, ready-made lesson plans, primary documents, recommended films and readings, and more.